The snow had been falling since midnight. By morning, it had buried the sidewalks to the knee, silenced the usual groan of Boston traffic, and turned the street outside Aurora Coffee into something that looked like a photograph still. White, almost beautiful, almost, because if you looked long enough, you'd notice the beauty was only on the surface. Underneath, the gutters were already turning gray with slush. The snowplows had been through twice. The cold wasn't the kind that made children want to go outside. It was the kind that got into your knuckles and stayed there. Inside Aurora Coffee, the warmth was aggressive. The heating system worked hard, the espresso machines harder, and the net result was a room that smelled of roasted beans and damp wool coats. Every table was taken. People stood too deep at the counter, watching the baristas the way you watch a surgeon, focused, impatient, ready to be disappointed. The woman at the register didn't fit the room. She was somewhere in her late 30s, wearing a plain gray coat, the kind you'd find on a rack at a mid-tier department store. No logo, no statement. Her hair was pulled back simply, and she wore no jewelry except a small watch on her left wrist. She didn't look poor, not exactly. She looked ordinary. In Aurora Coffee, where ordinary was the one thing the clientele actively avoided, that was almost worse. Her name was Victoria Hale, though no one in that room knew it. She placed her order quietly. A medium coffee, black. The total was $4.80. She handed her card across the counter and waited. The barista, young, sharp-boned. The kind of person who had learned early that their beauty gave them a certain permission, swiped the card. Waited. Swiped again. It's declined. Victoria didn't flinch. Try it again, please. I already tried it twice. Try it once more. The barista looked at her the way people look at a malfunction. Not with anger, exactly. With annoyance. The way you'd look at a printer that jammed on the one morning you couldn't afford a jam. She swiped the card a third time. The little reader beeped twice the short, dismissive double beep of rejection. It's declined, the barista said again, louder this time. The room shifted. Not dramatically, no one turned fully around. But there was that particular quality of stillness that falls over a crowd when someone else's misfortune has just been announced. Heads dipped a degree, ears sharpened. A few people kept their eyes deliberately on their phones, which was its own kind of attention. I don't understand, Victoria said. Her voice remained level. That card should work. Well, it doesn't. The barista held the card out between two fingers. The way you'd return a piece of trash. Do you have another payment method? Victoria looked at her bag. She searched it with the focused patience of someone who knew what they'd find. I have cash, but I don't have enough exact change. Ma'am, there's a line. There was. 8, 9 people deep. And now they were all watching, still not turning around. Still pretending they weren't, but watching. Someone at a nearby table said something quietly to their companion, and the companion laughed. Just slightly. Just enough. Victoria stood at the counter with $4 in her hand and 80 cents missing, and the barista already looking past her. No one moved. Then the man, 3 people back in line, stepped forward. He was not remarkable to look at. Medium height, broad through the shoulders in the way of someone who worked with their body rather than a gym. His jacket was dark blue, worn at the elbows, and his work boots had left wet prints on the entry mat where the snow had melted off them. He had the kind of face that didn't announce itself, strong jaw, calm eyes. The sort of expression that was neither warm nor cold but simply present. He looked like someone who had spent a lot of years paying attention to things. He reached the counter, set a $5 bill down beside Victoria's 4. That should cover it, he said to the barista. The barista looked at the money. Looked at the man. Looked at the line, which had adjusted around him like water around a stone. You don't, Victoria began. It's fine, he said. He wasn't looking at her when he said it. He was looking at the barista, waiting. No performance in it. No gesture toward the room. Just a man completing a transaction. The barista took the $9, made the change, set the cup on the counter. The man collected his own coffee, he'd already ordered, apparently. And the cup was waiting, and he walked to the door. He pushed it open with his shoulder, the way you do when your hands are full, and he was gone into the snow before Victoria could form another sentence. She stood at the counter for a moment, with her coffee in her hand. Around her, the room had already moved on. The line reformed. The barista called the next name. The little moment closed over itself like water over a stone. Victoria set her cup on the nearest empty table and sat down. She didn't drink it right away. She looked at the door where the man had gone, at the wet footprints he'd left that were already being tracked over by other shoes. She pulled out her phone and made a note. The apartment was on the third floor of a building on Calloway Street that had been built in 1962 and last renovated in 1994. The lobby smelled of old carpet and radiator heat. The elevator worked 3 days out of 5. And Ethan Brooks had learned to check the light above the doors before committing to it. He took the stairs. His apartment was 3 rooms. A kitchen, living space, 1 bedroom that Lily used, and a second room that was technically a bedroom but functioned as a storage space, a workspace, and, when the couch folded out, where Ethan slept. The windows were single pane and he'd sealed the edges with foam tape last October. The loft insulation was questionable. The building's heating was central and temperamental, and when it went out, which it did every January without fail, the super took between 12 and 36 hours to respond, and Ethan had learned to keep the electric space heater charged and positioned under Lily's desk for exactly that contingency. He made her breakfast every morning at 6:45, scrambled eggs, because she'd told him at age 4 that she liked them fluffy, and he'd spent 2 weeks figuring out the technique: low heat, constant movement, pulled before they looked done, and now he made them the same way every time, without thinking about it. Toast. Orange juice from concentrate. A glass of water that she almost never finished, but that he put out anyway because hydration mattered more than compliance. Lily was 6. She had her mother's eyes gray-green, the kind that looked different in different light, and Ethan's stubbornness, which the first-grade teacher had described in more diplomatic terms during the fall conference. She was in first grade at the public school, 4 blocks east. She read above her grade level and had strong opinions about which crayons were the correct colors for specific things. Purple was not an appropriate color for trees. This was non-negotiable. She came out of her room at 6:52 that morning, wearing mismatched socks and carrying a book about tide pools. "Dad," she said, climbing onto the kitchen stool, "do starfish have brains? They have a nervous system. Not exactly a brain the way we think of one. So they're smart in a different way? Something like that." She considered this, opening the book to a page she'd already dog-eared. Ethan set her plate down and poured her juice. "Mrs. Kellerman said that being smart and being wise are different things," Lily said. "Mrs. Kellerman's right. Which one are you?" Ethan looked at her. She was reading while she talked, which was a habit that drove some adults crazy, but which he'd decided was simply how she processed the world through 2 streams at once. "I'm working on it," he said. He ate standing at the counter, the way he always did when the day pressed. This particular morning, he had a 7:30 call with a property manager in Dorchester, a broken heat pump in a 12-unit building, 3 of which had already been without heat for 2 days, and then a full afternoon in Somerville, a commercial system that had been misdiagnosed twice by the previous company. He'd done the assessment last week. He knew what the problem was. It was a simple fix that had been made complicated by people who didn't want to admit they'd been wrong. He understood that feeling. He got Lily into her coat, her hat, her gloves. He checked her backpack folder, lunch, the library book she was returning. He walked her the 4 blocks to school in the snow, her hand in his, listening to her finish the starfish theory she'd been developing since breakfast. At the school door, she let go of his hand, without ceremony, and disappeared inside. The heavy door swinging shut behind her, with the authoritative thud of institutional architecture. He stood in the snow for a moment. Then he walked back to his truck and drove to Dorchester. The heat pump was exactly what he'd known it would be, a refrigerant leak compounded by a clogged filter that had been ignored for at least 18 months. He fixed it in 4 hours. The property manager, a man named Gerald Finch, who wore fleece vests indoors and called everyone buddy, seemed surprised that it was done. "That's it? That's it. The last guy said it needed a full compressor replacement. The last guy was wrong. Gerald looked at the invoice. Looked at Ethan. Looked at the invoice again. This is a lot less than I expected. I know. Ethan picked up his kit. Because it's what it costs. He drove to Somerville. The afternoon job was at a restaurant that had been without functional ventilation since Thursday. The kitchen staff had been working in what one of the cooks, a heavy-set man named Tony, who kept offering Ethan water, described as basically a sauna with food in it. The commercial hood system had two problems, a motor that was failing and a grease filter that someone had installed backward, which was a thing that Ethan had seen exactly once before in 11 years, and which never stopped baffling him. He fixed it. Tony gave him a container of soup. He drove home through the snow, ate the soup standing at the counter while Lily did homework at the kitchen table, and then, after she was in bed, he sat on the edge of the fold-out couch and looked at his phone. His bank app was open. He'd checked it 3 times since noon, as if the numbers might have changed. They hadn't. Rent was due in 11 days. He had enough. He'd have $43 left after. He set the phone face down on the cushion and lay back and looked at the water stain on the ceiling that had been there since before he moved in and which the landlord had promised, twice, to address. He thought about the woman at the coffee shop. The way she'd held herself still when the card was declined, the practiced quality of it. Like someone who had learned long ago to give nothing away. He'd noticed that before he noticed anything else. The stillness. He fell asleep with the light on. There are categories of invisibility. There is the kind that belongs to the very old, who have become furniture to the young. There is the kind that belongs to the very shy, who have chosen smallness as protection. And there is the kind that belongs to people whose work happens inside walls, the plumbers, the electricians, the HVAC technicians who keep the buildings running, who know the names of the ducts and the valves and the circuits that everyone else treats as background infrastructure, as simply the way things are. Ethan had been invisible for 11 years. He didn't resent it, exactly. Resentment required expectation, and he had adjusted his expectations with the methodical precision he brought to everything else. People didn't thank the system. They thanked comfort, warmth, the fact that the heat worked, not the person who'd made it work. That was fine. He wasn't in the business of being seen, but he noticed. He noticed the way clients angled their bodies slightly away when he walked in. The unconscious geometry of class. The way some of them referred to him in the third person while he was standing right there. The guy can look at the boiler as if his presence were conditional, subject to their acknowledgement. He noticed the houses, the art on the walls, the particular silence of expensive rooms. He wasn't envious of them, not in any burning way. He was curious about them, the way you're curious about a place you'll never visit. What he noticed most was the children. Some of them watched him work with open, uncomplicated interest. Small faces peering around doorframes. Questions. When the parents weren't there to redirect, what does that do? Why is it that color? Is it hot? He always answered. Clearly, with actual information, the way he'd answer Lily. Children didn't deserve the condensed version. Some of them didn't see him at all. Already learning the lesson their parents were teaching, without meaning to. He thought about Lily, who saw everything. One evening, this was a Thursday, 2 weeks before the coffee shop, he'd picked her up from school, and she'd handed him a drawing without comment, the way she sometimes did, as if it were documentation rather than a gift. It was a picture of a house, blue sky, green grass, despite the fact that outside it was February. 2 stick figures, one tall, one small. The tall one had a tool belt. At the bottom, in her first-grade handwriting, "Dad fixing things." He'd folded it and put it in his inside jacket pocket. It was still there. Victoria Hale had not been at Aurora Coffee by accident. She was the founder and CEO of Meridian Financial Technologies, a fintech company headquartered in a glass tower in the financial district that managed compliance software for mid-sized regional banks. She had built it from a 3-person operation in a shared workspace in Cambridge to a company of 240 employees over 11 years, and she had done it with the specific intensity of someone who understood that the distance between success and collapse was thinner than most people admitted. The test at Aurora Coffee was one she conducted 4 times a year. She called it a service audit, but her COO, a careful man named Bradley Winfield, who had worked with her for 6 years, and who had long ago decided that understanding Victoria fully was not a goal he could achieve in this lifetime, called it the card thing. She would take a card she'd temporarily put a block on, always a different card, always a different amount, and she would go to a place that dealt with the public, and she would let it decline, and she would observe. What she was observing was not the employees specifically. She was observing the room. Because Victoria had a theory, not a complicated one, that the fundamental character of any organization, any community, any system, could be read in how it treated the person who was momentarily unable to perform, who intervened, who looked away, who laughed, who pretended not to notice, which was its own answer. She had done this 17 times over 4 years. In restaurants, in coffee shops, at pharmacy counters, at hotel front desks. Twice, someone had helped. Both times, she'd noted it. The first time, 2 years ago, it had been a woman in her 50s who'd simply paid without comment and gone back to her crossword puzzle. Something about the lack of comment had stayed with Victoria, the economy of it. The absence of performance. This time, it was the man with the worn jacket. She had watched him from 3 people back in the line, which was where she'd positioned herself, as she always did, not at the front, not at the back, but in the middle where attention diffused, and she was simply another waiting body. She had watched him step forward with the $5 bill. She had watched his face. No announcement. No glance around the room to confirm that people were seeing him do a good thing. He paid, and he left. That was all. That was everything. She sat at the table with her coffee, and she made the note, and then she did what she did with every such note. She pulled up the browser on her phone, and she began. She had the plate number of his truck, which she'd seen through the window as he crossed the street. From the plate number, through a service her company's legal team used for background compliance checks, she had a name by 11 that morning. Ethan Brooks, 34, licensed HVAC technician, sole proprietor of a one-man operation registered as Brooks Heating and Air. Business address, matching his residential address on Callaway Street. No corporation, no employees, clean record. 11 years of operation. Reviews, on the contractor's platforms she could access, averaging 4.8. The reviews said, honest, fair, fixed what others couldn't, didn't oversell. She read them twice. Then she made a different kind of note. He was replacing a section of gutter drain pipe when the SUV appeared. It was a Thursday morning, 3 days after the coffee shop, and the snow had come back overnight, softer this time, smaller flakes, the kind that looked decorative and then quietly accumulated into something real. The pipe on the north side of the building had developed a crack over the winter, and the building manager, who trusted Ethan with small structural things that were technically outside his scope, had asked him to handle it before it got worse. It was not complicated work. It required a ladder, a section of replacement pipe he'd bought at the hardware store, and about 2 hours. He was 12 feet up the ladder when the vehicle turned onto Callaway Street. He noticed it because vehicles like that didn't turn onto Callaway Street. Long, dark, the particular shade of black that costs money, moving slowly in a way that wasn't uncertain it knew exactly where it was going. It pulled up in front of his building and stopped. Mrs. Petrova, from 2B, appeared on the front step, ostensibly checking her mail, actually doing the same thing Ethan was doing, looking. The driver, not the passenger. The driver got out first and opened the rear door. A woman stepped out. She was wearing a different coat than she'd had on in the coffee shop, but it was the same kind of coat quality without ostentation, the deep navy of it precise and intentional. Her hair was down now. She looked different with power than she had looked without it, which was not a surprise. Power was mostly posture, and posture was mostly practice. She looked up at the building, the way someone looks at a thing they've already decided about. Then she looked at the ladder. Ethan climbed down carefully. He'd learned never to rush down a ladder, no matter what was happening at the bottom. When he reached the ground, he turned around and looked at her across 6 feet of snow-covered sidewalk. She was watching him with the particular expression of someone who has rehearsed a thing and is now assessing whether the performance will be necessary. "Mr. Brooks," she said. "That's right. I'm Victoria Hale. She didn't extend her hand immediately. She let the name stand for a moment, which told him she was accustomed to it, meaning something. Then she extended her hand. He shook it. His hands were cold and rough from the ladder. Hers were neither cold nor rough. I was at Aurora Coffee on Monday morning, she said. He remembered. Of course he remembered. I know, he said. I'd like to talk to you. Mrs. Petrova had given up the pretense of checking mail and was simply watching from the stoop. Two kids from the second floor had appeared at their window above. The SUV's engine idled quietly, steady as a kept promise. Ethan looked at the gutter pipe. He looked at Victoria Hale. I'm going to finish what I'm doing first, he said. She paused for one beat. Of course. He went back up the ladder. She waited on the sidewalk, standing straight in the snow. And she did not look at her phone, and she did not look impatient. She watched him work, or she looked at the street, he couldn't tell which, from the ladder, and she waited. He finished the job in 20 minutes, came down, stowed the ladder in his truck. He pulled off his work gloves and looked at her. There's a diner on Waverly, he said, if you want to talk. The SUV followed his truck 6 blocks to the diner. The diner was called Paulette's. It had been there since 1971 and had changed its menu exactly once, in 2003, when they'd added a veggie omelet at the request of a regular who'd become a vegetarian after a health scare and who the owner, a woman named June, had known since childhood. The booths were red vinyl. The coffee came in heavy ceramic mugs. The windows were fogged from the warmth inside. And outside the snow continued in its quiet, indifferent way. They sat across from each other. Victoria Hale, Ethan had figured out during the 20-minute drive over, was accustomed to rooms responding to her. Not because she demanded it, she didn't seem the demanding type, not in any obvious way, but because she moved with the settled certainty of someone who had made 1,000 decisions and had been right more often than not, and rooms noticed that. He poured cream into his coffee. She drank hers black, the same way she'd ordered in the coffee shop. I run a company called Meridian Financial Technologies, she said. We develop compliance software for regional banks. 240 employees. We're in an expansion phase. We acquired a smaller firm in Providence 3 months ago, and we're integrating their operations. He waited. We have a position. Operations Manager, Facility and Physical Infrastructure Oversight. The role was created because we've outgrown our current structure. We need someone who understands systems, physical systems, the kind that buildings run on, and who can manage vendors, coordinate contractors, track budgets, identify problems before they become failures. She paused. We've been looking for 3 months. The candidates we've interviewed are technically qualified and functionally useless because they see what things are, not what they're about to become. She turned her coffee mug a quarter turn on the table. I watched you for 3 minutes on Monday. You assessed a situation. You identified the correct response. You executed it without any concern for the impression it created. No hesitation, no performance. Ethan looked at her. I paid for someone's coffee. You did the right thing when every other person in that room decided it wasn't their problem. She said it without emphasis, which gave it more weight than emphasis would have. That's not as common as it should be. I'm an HVAC technician. I know exactly what you are. She turned the mug again. The role pays $94,000 a year, health and dental, 3 weeks of paid time off. You'd be managing a team of 6 initially, possibly expanding to 9 after the Providence integration is complete. The number sat in the air between them. He knew what his hands were worth. He'd known it for 11 years. He'd made his peace with it. The kind of peace you make with a fact when you understand that peace is more efficient than grievance. But $94,000 was a number he'd never had occasion to say out loud in relation to himself. He'd thought about it the way you think about mountains real, existing, simply not where you are. He drank his coffee. Outside, a city bus pushed through the snow on Waverly, its headlights making a brief, warm smear of light on the fogged window. Why are you here? He said. Personally. You didn't send someone. She looked at him for a moment. Because I wanted to see if you'd react the same way to me across a table as you did to a stranger at a counter. She picked up her coffee. "You have. You're not impressed by the car," she said. "You finished your work before you'd talk to me. And you picked this diner." She almost smiled. "You're not trying to figure out what I want to hear." He turned his mug in his hands. "I don't have an office background. I know. That's not what I need. I don't have the vocabulary, the protocols. Those can be learned. Character can't." She set her cup down. "I'm not asking you to be someone you're not, Mr. Brooks. I'm asking you to be exactly who you are." In a different context, she reached into her coat pocket and produced a card. Simple card, heavy stock, just her name and a phone number. She set it on the table beside his mug. "Think about it," she said. "I'd like an answer by the end of the week." She stood, laid 2 bills on the table for the coffee, and walked to the door. The driver was already waiting. Ethan sat in the booth for a while after the SUV had gone. June, from behind the counter, said without looking up from the receipts. "She pay?" "She paid," Ethan said. "Good." June turned a page. "You want more coffee?" "Yeah," he said. "Thanks." He didn't tell Lily that night. He made dinner pasta with the tomato sauce he kept in the freezer in labeled portions, the system he'd developed, after a period of improvisation that he'd judged inefficient, and he listened to her describe the science project she was developing, involving the water cycle, and the specific injustice of the fact that Marcus from her class had been assigned precipitation, while she had been assigned evaporation, which she considered the less interesting half. "Evaporation is where it starts," Ethan said, "but precipitation is where it arrives. Nothing arrives without leaving first." She considered this with the seriousness it apparently deserved. Then she ate 3 more bites of pasta. After she was in bed, he read to her 2 chapters of the book about marine animals, both of them lying on her bed in the narrow yellow lamplight. He sat in the kitchen with the business card on the table in front of him, and the overhead light, making the small apartment feel both familiar and strange, the way a room looks different when you're considering leaving it. He'd lived on Calloway Street for 4 years. Before that, a smaller place in East Boston, after Clara had left, had gone. He always told himself, because left had a blame in it that he'd decided not to assign, not out of saintliness but out of practicality, because Lily didn't need a story about her parents that included blame on either side. Not yet, maybe not ever. He and Clara were cordial. She called on Lily's birthday and at Christmas. She sent money when she could, which was intermittently, which he'd adjusted around. He picked up the card, $94,000. He set it down. The fear was not one thing. It was several things braided together. And he sat with it the way you sit, with complicated equipment, trying to identify each component before assuming you knew the whole. There was the fear of being wrong, which was the oldest one. The fear that he'd walk into that building and discover, within a week, that there was a version of him that Victoria Hale had imagined competent, steady, capable in contexts beyond ducts and condenser coils, and that the real version of him would disappoint her with a thoroughness that would confirm the thing he'd always suspected, that he was exactly the size of his current life, no bigger. There was the fear of what he'd lose. Not the hardship he would not miss the $43 left after rent. The space heater, the elevator that worked 3 days out of 5, but the predictability. He knew this life. He knew its rhythms and its textures and its small demands. He knew how to succeed in it, barely, continuously, just enough. He did not know how to succeed in the other thing, and there was the fear quieter, harder to name, that wanting more was itself a kind of abandonment. Of what, exactly? He couldn't precisely say. Himself. Maybe. The person who'd built something out of very little, and had told himself that the building was enough. He went to bed at 11, lay on the fold-out in the dark. At 2 in the morning he was still awake. He got up and went to the kitchen, and drank a glass of water, and stood at the window looking at the street below, where the snow had stopped, and the streetlights made orange pools on the white ground and nothing moved. The city was as quiet as it ever got. He thought about the heat pump in Dorchester. The 2 days those 12 units had been cold. and the previous technician who'd said it needed a full compressor replacement because the full compressor replacement cost 4 times what the actual fix cost, and because the previous technician had not looked carefully at the thing itself, only at the category of thing it was. He thought about what it meant to look carefully. He went back to bed, slept, finally, around 3. In the morning, at breakfast, Lily set her juice glass down with the precision of a child making an announcement. And she looked at him across the table. "You look weird," she said. "I have something I'm thinking about." "What kind of thing?" He considered. "A job. A different kind of job." She absorbed this. Ate some egg. "Is it a good job?" "It might be. But, you're scared?" He looked at her. She said it the way she said most things, straight. Without softness, but without cruelty either. Just accurate. "A little," he said. She picked up her toast. "If you think it's the right thing," she said, "then you have to do it. That's what you always tell me." She went back to the book about tide pools. He sat across from her in the small kitchen in the winter light, and the steam came up from his coffee, and the radiator made its regular sound, and he thought, "She's 6 years old and she's right, and I've been making the same argument to her for years, and I've been refusing to make it to myself." He picked up his phone and called the number on the card. He wore his cleanest clothes, dark pants, a gray button-down, the jacket that wasn't the one with the worn elbows. He'd polished his shoes the night before, a thing he hadn't done since he couldn't remember when, using a tin of polish he'd found in the back of the closet that still worked, barely. Meridian Financial Technologies occupied the 14th and 15th floors of a building on Congress Street that was made almost entirely of glass. The lobby had a security desk, 2 sets of elevator doors, a large abstract installation on the east wall that might have been meant to suggest water or light or money, he genuinely couldn't tell, and a receptionist who smiled at him with the professional warmth of someone who had been trained to make all visitors feel equally unreadable. He gave his name. He waited on a low couch the color of fog. A woman came down to collect him. Her name was Annette. She said it with the practiced efficiency of someone who introduced herself 30 times a day, and she brought him up in the elevator and walked him through the 15th floor, which was open plan and busy and very bright, all the natural light coming through the glass walls and making the room look like it was inside a cloud. The people here wore the clothes of people who thought carefully about their clothes. Not expensive, exactly, some of it was expensive but considered. Intentional. They had the particular busyness of people who had learned that looking busy was part of performing competence, and some of them actually were busy, and he couldn't yet tell which was which. He caught the glances. Not hostile assessment. The kind of look people gave someone who appeared in a familiar environment in an unfamiliar way. He wore his plainness like he always wore it, without apology, without performance. Victoria's office was in the corner, which he'd expected. She stood when Annette brought him in, which he hadn't. "Mr. Brooks, sit down." He sat. The office was organized. Not sparse, there were papers and files and 2 monitors and a whiteboard with something written on it that he didn't try to read, but organized in a way that suggested a mind that needed things to be locatable. "I'd like to introduce you to the team today," she said. "And then, if you're willing, I'd like you to spend the afternoon walking the facility, the Providence office included. We can do that on video, and tell me what you see." "What I see? What's wrong? What's about to be wrong? What's been ignored?" He looked at her. "You want an audit? I want your audit." He nodded. "All right." The team was 6 people. He met them in a conference room on the 14th floor. And they were uniformly polite, in the way of people who had been told to be polite. A woman named Dana, who managed vendor contracts, looked at him with the particular alertness of someone deciding whether to be threatened or curious. A man named Marcus, different Marcus than Lily's classmate who handled facility scheduling, seemed genuinely indifferent, which Ethan found more comfortable than the people performing welcome. He didn't try to perform, either. He asked about systems, maintenance schedules, vendor response times. The last time the HVAC on the 14th floor had been serviced. "I think February," Marcus said. "Last February, or this February." A pause. "Last." He made a note. He walked the building for 3 hours. Not the official tour Annette had offered one, and he'd thanked her and declined. He walked it the way he walked every building, looking at the things that were load-bearing. The things that connected to other things. The things that people walked past without noticing because they'd been there long enough to become invisible. The server room on the 14th floor had an air circulation problem. Not critical, not yet, but the intake on the secondary cooling unit was partially blocked by a storage rack that someone had pushed against the wall for convenience and never moved back. He checked the temperature readings on the unit's display panel. Elevated. Within normal range, technically, but elevated in the way that precedes a problem. He stood in the server room for a few minutes, looking at the rack, looking at the intake, looking at the readings. Then he went back to the conference room and wrote down what he'd found. The fraud started in Providence. He didn't find it looking for fraud. He found it looking for patterns, which was what he did with every system he examined, not looking for the thing that was wrong yet, but for the thing that had changed in a way that wasn't accounted for. It was his second week at Meridian. He'd been given access to the operational dashboards as part of his facility role: power consumption, HVAC load, physical access logs. He wasn't supposed to be analyzing the financial data streams, but the dashboards were integrated, and he noticed something in the physical access logs for the Providence office, a pattern of after-hours entries for a specific key card, 3 or 4 nights a week, always between 11:30 and 1 in the morning, always the same workstation cluster. He didn't know what it meant. He knew it was a pattern that didn't match any maintenance, schedule, or security protocol he'd been given. He wrote it down. He brought it to Dana, because Dana managed vendor access, and he thought it might be a vendor issue. Dana looked at the printout he'd brought her. Her expression changed. "Which workstation cluster is this?" she said. He told her. She picked up her phone. What followed was a sequence that Ethan watched from the edge of, which was where he was comfortable. Victoria's team determined, over the following 48 hours, that the pattern corresponded to an employee in the Providence accounting integration who had been exploiting a gap in the merged compliance systems to run duplicate vendor payment requests. The amounts were small enough individually to pass automated review. The total, over 3 months, was $140,000. The employee was confronted. The gap was closed. The money was recoverable. On a Friday afternoon, Victoria called him into her office. She was standing at the window when he came in, looking at the street below where the snow had been all week, coming and going. She turned around when he closed the door. "You weren't looking for it," she said. "You were looking at the access logs because of the HVAC question. I wanted to know if the after-hours pattern was maintenance-related." She looked at him for a moment. Outside, the city moved in its steady, indifferent way. $140,000, she said, "and you found it because you were paying attention to the air conditioning." "The air conditioning matters," he said. She almost smiled. "Yes," she said. "It does." He turned to leave. "Mr. Brooks." He stopped. "The team is coming around," she said. In case you hadn't noticed. He had noticed. Dana had started asking him questions instead of answering them. Marcus had stopped scheduling maintenance windows without running them past him first. Small things. The kind of small things that, accumulated, meant something. "I noticed," he said. He went back to the 14th floor. The snow came on a Tuesday, 6 weeks after he'd started at Meridian. Light snow, the kind that fell straight down without wind, each flake distinct and unhurried. By 7 in the morning, it had covered the sidewalks in a thin, even layer that muffled footsteps and made the city feel like it was considering something. He was up at 6. He made Lily's eggs the same way he always made them. She had a substitute teacher today and was unimpressed by the development but was willing to go, which was its own small victory. He walked her to school in the snow, her hand in his, and this morning she didn't tell him about tide pools or starfish or the injustice of her science assignment. She just walked beside him in the quiet, and he let her. And when they got to the school door, she said bye. Dad, the same way she always said it without ceremony. Total, and the door swung shut behind her. He stood in the snow. Then he walked 3 blocks north to Aurora Coffee. The morning crowd was the same crowd, more or less. Same queue, same noise, same warmth inside that hit you in the face when you pushed through the door. He got in line. The barista at the counter was different, younger, unfamiliar with the particular architecture of that morning 6 weeks ago. Fine, he ordered. The same thing he'd ordered before. A medium coffee. Black. Because he didn't have a complicated order. He paid with his new card, a Meridian direct deposit card, that felt slightly unreal in his hand. Still, the way the number on his pay stub felt slightly unreal, though it was becoming more real with each week. He took his coffee to a small table by the window and sat. Outside, people moved through the snow, heads down, collars up, the universal Boston winter posture. A cab left a wake of gray slush on the curb. A dog on a leash stopped to investigate a fire hydrant with the gravity of someone conducting important research. He had 40 minutes before he needed to be at the office. He heard the chair across from him move. Victoria Hale sat down across the table with her own coffee medium. Black. He hadn't heard her come in. She was better at that than he would have expected. Coincidence? He said. The building's 3 blocks from here, she said. I've been coming here for years, he considered. And 6 weeks ago? 6 weeks ago, I was conducting a service audit. She looked at him. You know that. I do. She drank her coffee. He drank his. Outside, the snow fell in its quiet, unhurried way. How's Lily? She said. He looked at her. She'd asked about Lily twice before, briefly, in passing, the way you ask about things you've been told about when you're trying to demonstrate that you listened. He'd told her about Lily in their second week, when she'd asked why he needed to keep his schedule rigid enough to pick up at 3:15 sharp. She's good, he said. She's got a substitute teacher today and she's handling it. The Starfish book? She's moved on. Wales now. A natural progression. He nodded. The coffee was good. It had always been good coffee. That wasn't the coffee shop's problem. Had never been the problem. The problem was the room around the coffee. The atmosphere of careful indifference. It seemed, this morning, marginally less cold. He couldn't tell if the room had changed, or if he had. Would you do it again? She asked. Do what? What you did. If it were someone else at that counter. Someone you didn't know. He thought about it for a moment. Genuinely thought about it, rather than answering quickly. Yes, he said. Even knowing what came after? The job? The all of it? The after part's not why, he said. That's the point. She looked at him steadily. She had a way of looking at you that was direct, without being challenging. Simply present, assessing. The look of someone who had learned that most people gave themselves away if you just looked at them long enough, without making them nervous. No, she said. I know it isn't. She stood, picked up her coffee. She looked like herself, not the woman in the gray coat from 6 weeks ago, not the woman stepping out of the SUV, but something closer to both of them than either. Just a person in a good coat, holding a cup of coffee in the snowlight. I'll see you upstairs, she said. He watched her go toward the door. She pushed through into the cold morning without looking back, and the snow swallowed the sound of her footsteps almost immediately. He sat for a while longer. He thought about the fold-out couch he'd kept, even though his salary could now cover a 2-bedroom he hadn't moved yet, was taking it slowly. Wasn't ready to make that particular declaration to himself or the world. He thought about the drawing in his jacket pocket. Dad fixing things, slightly worn now at the folds. He thought about the server room on the 14th floor, which he'd had the vendor service properly last week, and the intake that now drew air cleanly, without obstruction. He thought about the access log pattern, about the way it had appeared not because he'd gone looking for fraud, but because he'd gone looking at the thing itself, the real thing. The system as it actually ran rather than as it was supposed to run. He thought about his daughter saying, if you think it's the right thing, then you have to do it. He was 40 minutes from the office. He had time. He went up to the counter and bought a muffin for June, who had already told him approximately 11 times that she didn't own the diner. The diner was on Waverly Street, where they'd first talked, but the instinct had transferred. He bought a muffin anyway. The barista looked at him, slightly confused, and he said, keep it, for the staff. And the barista looked at it, and then looked at him, and said, thanks. Just that. Just thanks. He put on his coat and walked out into the snow. 3 blocks north, the glass building waited. 14 floors up, the team was assembling. Dana would have questions about the Providence integration timeline. Marcus had a vendor meeting he'd asked Ethan to sit in on. There was a maintenance issue on the 15th floor, a heating zone that was running 2 degrees colder than the others. Not a critical problem, but the kind of thing you addressed before it became one. He walked through the snow with his hands in his pockets, and his collar up, and his shoes making clean prints in the white ground. And the city moved around him the way it always moved, fast, indifferent, vast, not particularly interested in any one person's story. That was fine. He knew what he was walking toward. He was the same man who had walked away from that counter 6 weeks ago, no announcement, no backward glance. Just someone who'd seen something that needed doing and done it, and gone back out into the snow. The building's glass doors reflected the white sky, and his own small figure approaching, and he pushed through them without breaking stride, and the lobby warmth hit him in the face, and he took off his coat as he walked to the elevator. The elevator worked. He went up,